Welcome back to Blacklit Memory. Tonight, we're going deep 8 full Appalachian horror stories, each set in a cabin that shouldn't exist, or a trail you should have turned back from. You'll hear about rituals still whispered in the trees, memories that don't belong to you, and places that change shape the longer you look. These aren't just ghost stories. These are decisions you'll question, echoes you'll still hear. Before we begin, go ahead and subscribe, and tell a friend who's ever driven past a fire road and wondered, what's back there? Let me know in the comments which story haunts you most. Now settle in. Don't mind the sound behind you. It's time to begin. I got back to Beckley on a Thursday afternoon. 6 months to the day since I'd last been home. The town hadn't changed much. Same sun-faded gas station signs. Same old men smoking outside the hardware store like they were welded to the bench. My parents' place sat quiet at the end of a gravel lane, overgrown with yellowing grass. Mom wasn't home yet, so I let myself in with a spare key under the owl statue, tossed my duffel by the stairs, and headed straight for the basement. That's where Jamie's stuff ended up after he vanished. My cousin. He'd been 2 years older, and most of my best memories had him in them, fishing in Cranberry Creek, digging fire pits behind Papa's trailer, building little lean-tos out of birch and pine like we were preparing for a war. When he went missing, the story got the usual 48 hours of press. Experienced hiker disappears in Hollow Notch. After a week, people stopped asking. Nobody ever found a body, or a shoe, or even his pack. I hadn't gone down there in years. But I remembered where Mom stored his things, a milk crate full of his notebooks and maps, wedged between old canning jars and boxes of Christmas lights. Most of the pages were familiar. Jamie had this habit of sketching everything he saw, from trail forks to old tools, sometimes little diagrams of his camp layouts. But one page near the back caught my eye. A rough sketch, 3 log cabins drawn in a triangle formation, shaded in with thick pencil lines. Above them, he'd scribbled, "Knocking logs. Stay west of the hollow." I didn't recognize it. The date on the bottom was October 9th, the day before he disappeared. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the couch with the TV muted, staring at the ceiling while the wind pushed the branches against the house in slow, creaking waves. Around 3 a.m., I pulled out my phone and searched a backcountry forum I use sometimes when planning hikes. Someone had posted just a week ago in a thread about forgotten cabins in the Appalachians. A user named Woodwalker85 wrote, "Found a 4th one northeast of Hollow Notch. Thought I saw someone inside. Looked collapsed, might have been an animal." I read that post 5 times. Something in me twisted like a rope pulled too tight. The next morning, I borrowed my uncle's 4x4 packed light, just my sleeping bag, headlamp, a hunting knife, snacks, and my own sketchbook, and set out toward the fire road past Gawley Ridge. No cell signal up that far, which was the point. I told Mom I was going for a day hike. She didn't ask questions. It was already afternoon when I reached the ridgeline. The trail was old, mostly overgrown, but there were signs someone had come through recently, fresh cuts in the brush, cigarette butts pressed into the mud. Around 3 miles in, I heard it. A sound I couldn't place at first, faint, rhythmic, tap, 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 like someone gently knocking on a tree trunk with a stick. I froze, listening. It wasn't wind. It wasn't a woodpecker. Either too slow, too deliberate, and it didn't come from one direction. First, it echoed west, then northeast, then closer. I kept going, heart knocking in my chest the same way. The woods grew denser as I descended into the hollow, the sunlight dimming under the canopy. Then I saw them, the cabins. 3 of them, exactly like the drawing. Old, logs blackened with time and rot, roofs caved in, moss climbing up the stone chimneys. One had a broken door hanging sideways. Another was half swallowed by vines. No trails leading in or out. Just silence, except the tapping. Always the tapping. I picked the least decayed one and stepped inside. The floorboards were warped, but solid enough. Dust coated everything. A shattered lantern lay in one corner. Along the far wall, near where the fire pit had once been, something was carved into the wood. I stepped closer. Tally marks, rows and rows of them, cut deep into the beams, some faded gray with age, others sharp and fresh. I ran my fingers over one. The wood splintered under my touch. I camped just outside, figuring I'd spend one night and head back first thing in the morning. The knocking hadn't stopped, but I tried to convince myself it was just wood shifting into the cold. Trees settle. Animals move. I told myself these things as I ate a protein bar and huddled in my bag. The air dropped fast after dark. My fire sputtered, and I didn't bother restarting it. Sometime after midnight, I woke to footsteps, slow, soft, circling the cabin. I didn't move, just listened, my breath loud in my ears. The steps crunched in the leaves, deliberate and slow, making a wide arc around the building. Then nothing, just stillness. Until knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp raps against the back wall. I sat up, heart hammering. Shined my flashlight toward the sound. Nothing. I stepped outside. No prints in the dirt. I scanned the trees, my light cutting pale slices through the dark. And that's when I saw it. Just for a second, a pale face watching from behind a tree. Too high off the ground. Too still. The moment I blinked, it vanished. And the knocking began again. This time, closer. I didn't sleep after that. Just sat there with my back to the cabin wall, gripping the knife in one hand and the flashlight in the other. The knocking didn't stop, not even for a second. Sometimes it echoed from deep in the woods. Other times it came so close, I could feel the vibrations through the dirt. I waited until the first gray light broke through the trees, then packed my gear without eating or thinking. I needed to get out fast. The path back up the ridge was narrower than I remembered. Branches leaned in, snagging my sleeves. I kept scanning the woods for that face, for any hint of movement. But all I heard was that goddamn knocking. Slower now, rhythmic, like it was following me. Every time I stopped to listen, it stopped too. It was as if it wanted me to know I wasn't alone, but not quite enough to see it again. I took a wrong turn near the rock outcrop and ended up at a steep drop I didn't recognize. The trail had split in a way it hadn't before I was sure of it. I pulled out my sketchbook, flipped to the cabin drawing, and tried to orient myself. That's when I noticed something that stopped me cold. There were now 4 cabins on the page, not 3. One more had been added to the right, a tiny square drawn in the same style as Jamie's hand, only I hadn't touched the page since yesterday. A sick wave hit my gut. I climbed to the outcrop to get a better look and spotted the clearing again, same 3 cabins at the base of the hollow. But off to the side, farther east, half hidden in the trees, there it was. A fourth structure, gray, leaning, but new. That cabin wasn't there before. I know it wasn't. I stayed up there for a while, telling myself I was resting. But really, I was just frozen. Eventually, I made a small fire in a ring of stones and waited for the sun to get higher. No more knocking now, just wind and bird song, like the forest was pretending nothing had happened. I chewed a stale granola bar, tried to steady my hands, and told myself I'd head north and loop around the ridge. As long as I didn't go east, I'd be fine. Right before dawn, the forest went quiet again. Dead quiet, no wind, no birds, no leaves moving. Then I heard something else. Steps. Heavy, dragging steps, slow and irregular, coming up from the hollow. I stood, heart pounding, and turned toward the slope. At first, I couldn't see anything. Then it appeared crawling between the trees, long limbs that moved wrong, stiff like they weren't made to bend. Its shoulders scraped bark as it dragged itself uphill. And the face. My God, it looked like Jamie. Not exactly. Not like he did when he was alive. More like someone had carved his likeness into driftwood and stretched it over bone. I didn't wait. I ran. I tore through brush, slid down wet leaves, caught my sleeve on a root and ripped it loose. Behind me, I heard it coming, the crack of branches, the low scrape of something heavy pulling itself after me. I didn't look back, just kept running. I nearly pitched forward into a dry creek bed, but managed to leap it. Something cold brushed my ankle mid-air fingers. I swear, and I fell hard on the other side. My knife went flying. I didn't go back for it. I clawed up the slope, hands bloody with shale and pine needles, lungs raw, my legs burned. But then ahead, I saw the road, just a sliver of gravel cutting through the trees like salvation. I stumbled out, tripping, nearly on my knees, and ran until I couldn't hear the thing anymore. When I finally looked back, there was nothing there. Just the woods, quiet and still, like it had always been. Back in Beckley, I didn't tell anyone the full story. Said I got lost overnight, got spooked by a bear. My uncle bought it. My mom didn't press. I stayed one more night, then left town before the sun rose. A few days later, I checked the forum again. Woodwalker85 had posted a new update. Cabin count is up to 5. You weren't alone. That was all it said. I flipped through Jamie's notebook again, and my stomach turned. The last page the sketch now had 5 cabins, no mistaking it. Same lines, same pencil smudges. I didn't draw it. Nobody else touched it. I keep that sketchbook in a locked drawer now. Haven't been back to the mountains since. But some nights, when I can't sleep, I swear I hear it again, faint. Through the window, no wind, no trees moving. Knock, knock, knock. My dad used to say that the forest will talk to you, but only if it wants you there. He'd told me that on a hike when I was 10, deep in the southern stretch of the Appalachians. I remembered that moment more clearly than anything else from my childhood, the way he paused on the trail, head tilted like he was listening to something beyond the wind. If it's quiet, he said, and the birds stop singing, you turn around. He wasn't being poetic. He meant it. I hadn't thought about that memory in years, not until the package arrived. No return address. Just a plain padded envelope sitting on my doorstep 2 weeks ago with an old mini cassette inside. I had to dig out a recorder from my old college gear to even play it. The first few minutes were hiking sounds, boots on leaves, laughter. One of the guys saying, "This place isn't even on the damn map." Then came something stranger. A woman's voice. Soft, calm, my voice, Thui, it said. Clear as day. You shouldn't be here. I don't know those hikers. But the area matched a place I'd read about in an archived mining report years ago, a cluster of 6 cabins up in the Tiger's Back Range. Abandoned after a mining accident in the 1940s. No one ever said what the accident was, only that the entire settlement was vacated within a week. No bodies ever recovered. The land was left to the trees. Locals still mention it in passing, with that tone they use for things they believe in but don't want to explain. The trailhead's been removed from state maps, but I know how to read ridge lines. And I had the old coordinates. I left at dawn with my pack, my recorder, a solar charger, and a printed satellite map. My plan was simple: hike in, document each cabin, gather audio samples, and spend one night. Enough to rule out a hoax, or worse, confirm something I wasn't ready for. The air was dry and sharp, the kind that slices your throat just a little on every inhale. By mid-afternoon, the trail narrowed into animal paths. That's when I saw the first footprint. It was barefoot, small like a child's, but long and thin, toes splayed unnaturally wide. It was pressed into a patch of wet clay just off the trail. Then another, about 6 feet ahead, and another, all headed away from the direction I was walking, away from the cabins. The first structure appeared just past a thick bend in the ridge. Gray logs slouched against one another like a tired spine, roof half collapsed, chimney crumbling into the dirt. I circled once before stepping inside. No door, just an open rectangle leading into dust and silence. The air inside was colder, yani, as if something had been holding its breath. There was a stove in the corner, one of those old iron-bellied wood burners with a rusted pipe that snaked up through the roof. I opened the hatch and found a pile of ash inside. Still warm, not hot, but not cold either. I hadn't seen a soul on the trail, no signs of a camp. But something had been here, maybe still was. I set up the recorder outside the first cabin, then moved to the next. All 6 were spread across a short plateau, maybe a 5-minute walk apart at most. The second cabin was better preserved. Intact walls, door still latched with a hook from the inside. I hesitated before opening it. Something about it felt still. Not empty still, like the air had been frozen and was just waiting to unthaw. I stepped in and started the internal mic. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, a whisper. Not with my ears through the headphones. I turned up the gain. The voice came again, soft and hoarse. In Vietnamese, dung do trong khoi. No, they do. Don't breathe in the smoke. It sees you through it. My blood chilled. I turned off the recorder, stepped outside, and checked the air clear. Crisp. No smoke. No scent of burning. But when I checked the stove inside that cabin, there it was, again ash. Fine, light gray, perfectly smooth on the surface, and right in the center, a handprint. 5 fingers, long, pressed deep into the cooled ash. No smudge around it, just the hand. I visited the next 2 cabins in a blur, trying to stay calm. Each one the same, no animals, no bugs, no sound. just that lingering sense that the walls were listening. In the fifth cabin, the stove was empty, but the ash had spilled out onto the floor, forming a thin, broken trail. Not scattered placed, like something had walked through the fire and tracked it across the room. Then I reached the sixth. Smoke was drifting from its chimney, a single ribbon curling into the cold blue sky. I froze. My feet wanted to turn back. But I had to see. I had to know. I opened the door. Inside, someone sat by the stove, cross-legged, motionless, facing the wall. Same build as me, same jacket, hair pulled into the same loose braid. I didn't move, couldn't speak. My recorder was running in my pocket, but I couldn't hear anything except my own breath. The figure lifted a hand slowly, like it was stiff or heavy, and pressed it down into the stove's open mouth, into the ash. Then it turned, where the face should have been. There was only black, not a mask, not shadows, just a void, as if the features had been scooped out and filled with smoke, and the handprint in the ash was still glowing. I slammed the door shut behind me and staggered back, nearly tripping over the porch rail. The smoke from the chimney was still rising, steady and gray, as if nothing inside had moved. I didn't stop to look again. I just turned and ran. Down the slope, away from the sixth cabin, past the others without glancing in. I don't know how far I ran, maybe half a mile, maybe 2, but when I finally stopped, the sky had shifted and the trees felt taller. I fumbled to check my GPS, but the screen was blank, no signal, no coordinates, just a flickering icon and static. My compass needle spun once and stilled, pointing west, but the sun wasn't in the right place. None of it made sense. I tried to retrace my steps by memory, following the mossy side of the trees, but every path I took seemed to fold back toward the cabins. I never saw them, but I could feel them nearby, like heavy stones sitting behind the tree line. I started hearing that whisper again, not words this time. Just a slow, steady breath, not mine. I stopped to rest near a downed tree and checked my recorder. I played back the last clip, hoping to prove to myself that I'd imagined it all. But layered beneath the background wind was something else. A voice, 6 voices, maybe more, all whispering the same name in sequence: Tui. Thui. Thui. Then silence. Then the sound of a long exhale. And that phrase again. In my voice this time. Don't breathe in the smoke. I snapped the player shut and stood up, trying to calm myself. I needed to break line of sight with the cabins, get to higher ground, and orient myself. There was an old trail marker I remembered seeing as a kid, carved into a stone about halfway down the ridge. If I could find that, I could make my way toward the old fire road. I climbed for over an hour, hands numb, breath catching in my throat with every step. And then there it was. The stone, half buried in ferns, with my father's initials carved into its side. I let myself believe it was over. Sat down, drank water, and played back one of my earlier recordings just to prove I still had control of something. But even on that old clip, the one I'd recorded at the first cabin there, was new audio layered beneath the ambient hum. A soft tapping, like fingers drumming lightly on the recorder itself. Then came the whisper again, this time closer, clearer. This is where I stayed. I didn't hear it through the headphones. I heard it beside me. Smoke began seeping through the trees, thin tendrils crawling low along the forest floor like fog, but moving against the wind. I stood slowly, heart pounding, eyes scanning. Something shifted in the haze, a shape. Tall and bent at the middle, dragging itself upright with stiff, jerky movements. Ash clung to its limbs, its shoulders, its face if it had one. It reached one long arm toward me, and in its hand was my recorder. The screen still blinking. My voice came out of it, not from the speakers, but as if it was speaking through the plastic, "Stay here." I ran. Downhill, not caring which direction, just away. Branches tore at my jacket. Thorns dragged across my wrists. The smoke chased behind, silent but thickening. My lungs burned not from exertion, but from breathing it in. It was cold, somehow. Colder than the air, like breathing in frost and ash at the same time. I coughed, stumbled, nearly fell flat. That's when my foot caught on something, a root, maybe, and I rolled hard down a steep ravine. Dirt filled my mouth. My shoulders slammed against a rock. I came to rest in a shallow ditch, half blind with pain, but still breathing. Above me, the smoke curled along the ridge, watching. It didn't follow. It just hovered. I made it out just before dark, found a rusted gate near an old gravel turnout, and followed the road until I could flag down a trucker hauling timber. I didn't explain anything. Couldn't. Back in Knoxville, I deleted every file from that trip, all except one. A 4-second clip. No voice, no breath. Just the sound of ash shifting softly like a hand brushing through cold coals. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, that file plays itself just once. Then the air in the room gets very, very still. Don't go past the 7th cabin. The old trail warden told me. They don't stay empty by accident. He said it with the kind of voice that carried weight, like he wasn't trying to scare me, just stating a fact. His fingers were stained with tobacco and creased like old bark. And when I asked why, he only shook his head. They sealed the 8th one. If it's open now, something's wrong. My name's Eli Mercer. I'm a graduate student out of Asheville, tracking the historical habitats of the Appalachian cottontail. Most people wouldn't care about a rabbit that looks like any other. But these ones are different, isolated by mountains, threatened by logging decades ago. A 1930s survey mapped out a stretch of old cabins once used by trappers and loggers up near Blue Knob Ridge. That's where I was headed. I figured I could camp along the trail and use the old cabins for cover if weather turned. The trailhead was overgrown, half forgotten. The first mile felt fine, cool breeze, tall hemlocks, even a scattering of mushrooms I recognized. The cabins weren't marked on any current topo maps, but I had a photocopy of the old survey. 9 cabins, a mile apart, lining a narrow ridge trail the locals call Old Widow's Walk. I didn't see any widows. Just a curious crow that followed me for longer than it should have. The first cabin barely qualified. Just a roof and 2 walls, with moss swallowing the logs like green fire. Inside, I found a rusted coffee pot and what might have been a spoon nailed to a rafter. I took a few pictures, logged the coordinates, and moved on. Cabin 2 had more structure. A wood stove, still upright. Rabbit snares hanging like forgotten wind chimes along the porch rail. By cabin 4, the air changed. Not colder, heavier, like I was walking underwater. I chalked it up to altitude. The door creaked when I opened it, revealing a single cot and a wall covered in carvings. Hundreds of them. small bone shapes, circles with 2 notches, and something that looked like a mouth full of jagged teeth. Above the doorway hung a charm twigs wrapped in red twine, tied around a bundle of fur and bone. Rabbit, maybe. I took it down, curious, slipped it into my side pocket without thinking too hard about it. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, I reached cabin 6. This one felt different, almost intact, like someone had kept it up. Roof solid, door still on its hinges. Inside was dusty but clean. A single chair, a broom in the corner, and shelves with glass jars filled with cloudy liquid. I didn't open them. I laid out my sleeping bag near the door, ate some jerky, and wrote field notes by headlamp. At some point, I must have dozed off. The sound of something moving outside woke me. Not a bear too light. I froze, listening. A soft crunch of leaf litter. Then nothing. Minutes passed. I held my breath until the silence folded in on itself. When morning came, I stepped outside and found my pack sitting on the porch. The same pack I'd hung from a tree branch 10 feet away to keep it from animals. By now, I should have turned back, I know that. But something pushed me forward, a mix of pride, stubbornness, and maybe the feeling that I'd started a story I had to see through. Cabin 7 came into view around noon. It sat crooked on its foundation, sagging slightly to one side. The door was ajar. Dried blood streaked the threshold. Not fresh, but not ancient either. Inside, the smell was wrong. Not rot, something metallic, like old coins soaked in vinegar. The table was set with 3 wooden bowls, each filled with a black sludge that didn't move. Bone charms hung from the rafters, dozens of them, gently swaying though the air was still. My flashlight flickered as I stepped further in. The floor creaked like it was breathing beneath me. I flipped out through the logbook I'd brought with me. There'd been a note from a trapper dated 1937. Cabin 7's got the door that won't stay closed. We nailed it shut, but it always swings open come dusk. I remembered the line clearly now. I looked back at the door. Still open, no wind. I felt the first real fear then, the kind that doesn't come from anything you see, but from knowing something's wrong and not being able to explain how. I turned to leave and saw a faint trail, barely more than a depression in the leaves, winding behind the cabin unmarked. Untrodden? Wasn't on any of my maps. But there were tracks. Bare feet, leading down. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. No signal. Still, I stepped onto the path. Each step forward felt like crossing a line I wouldn't be able to come back from. The forest closed in, quieter than it had any right to be. And then I saw it, cabin 8, tucked into a hollow, half hidden by a grove of laurels. Smoke curled from the chimney. The smoke curled slow and steady, like someone had just stirred the fire. But as I stood there, nothing moved. No wind, no birds, no sound but my own breath, loud and uneven in my ears. Cabin 8 looked newer than the others, almost too intact. The logs were dark and oiled, the windows clean, and the door wide open, tilted slightly on its hinges like it had been left that way on purpose. I called out. No answer. Just the dull echo of my own voice folding back into the trees. I took a step closer, then another. My boots sank into soft moss that hadn't been disturbed in weeks, maybe months. That's when I knew something was wrong. Smoke, but no footprints. Fire, but no firewood. The scent was pine and ash. But the chimney was cold when I reached up and touched the stone. Inside, it was too clean. Not like someone had tidied up, but like the dust and rot had never come. A cot in the corner, neatly made. A single table with a chair tucked in just right. The hearth was swept. Above it hung a bone charm like the others, but larger. Deliberate. Arranged in a spiral with red twine, crisscrossed like a net. I stepped inside. The floor didn't creak. The air was warm, but I still felt cold. There was a book on the table. Hand-bound. No title. Just a leather cover with a rough carving of that same circle with notches symbol I'd seen back in cabin 4. I opened it. Every page was covered in tight handwriting recipes, symbols, rituals. One page had been dog-eared. I flipped to it and read, "To close a mouth. The bone must spiral. The door must seal. The blood must speak." I didn't understand what that meant. Not yet. But the next line stopped me cold. "Do not stay once the door swings open." My head jerked toward the doorway. It was shut. I hadn't touched it. I tried to open it again, but the handle wouldn't move. Not jammed, sealed. Like the wood had grown around it. My hands shook. I ran to the window, but it was nailed shut from the inside. Panic settled in my throat like smoke. I turned, and that's when I saw the name. My name, E. Mercer, scratched into the beam above the cot in looping. Clumsy letters. Not fresh, not old. Maybe days, maybe less. I stumbled back and hit the table, knocking the book to the floor. It landed open to a different page, an illustration of a rabbit. Spine twisted, mouth wide, with a charm placed over its heart. Something slammed against the wall outside. One hit, then another, rhythmic, like knocking. I counted 7 strikes before silence returned. My chest burned with the need to move, to run, but there was nowhere to go. No door, no open window. The only way out was the chimney. I climbed. Stones cut my palms. Soot choked my throat. At the top, I pulled myself through and fell into the cold grass, gasping. I looked back. The chimney was still cold, no fire. Never was. But the smoke had returned. I ran, back up the path, through the laurels. When I reached the clearing where cabin 7 should have been, it was gone. Not collapsed, gone. In its place was a circle of ash, perfectly round. In the center stood a single object, the bone charm I'd taken from cabin 4. Now, hanging from a nail in the air with no beam to hold it. I kept moving. The trail was wrong. Trees I didn't recognize. The sun wouldn't rise. My watch spun endlessly, ticking but never counting time. That's when I saw him, another hiker, or something like one. Tall, pale, face blank like river stone. He didn't speak. Just stepped forward and held something out. It was a charm, spiral of rabbit bone, tied with twine. I took it. He vanished. I didn't ask where he went. I don't know why, but I understood then. The charm was a key, a way to seal whatever had come loose beneath cabin 8. I'd opened something, or been meant to open something. Maybe that's what the cabins were for, not shelter, but structure. Teeth in a mouth meant to stay closed. I made it back. Somehow. Smoke still curled from the chimney, but this time the door was shut. I nailed the charm above it. Another on the threshold. My blood smeared across the spiral, like the book said. The woods were so quiet, I could hear my heartbeat echo off the trees. Inside, something pounded once, then nothing. I turned away, left the trail, hiked until my legs gave out, then stumbled the rest of the way to the road. I didn't speak for days after they found me. I've never gone back. But sometimes, at night, I smell pine smoke, and when I do, I check the maps, because the old survey said there were 9 cabins, and I only ever saw 8. The journal came in a padded envelope with no return address. Just my name, Annie Calder, printed in all caps on the label, and inside, a small leather-bound notebook, scorched around the edges. The first page was barely legible, warped with water or heat. But a line at the top stood out: the smoke doesn't rise, it sinks. If you see it hugging the ground, don't breathe. Below it, a date July 14th, 1962, and the initials RBB. I was 6 months into a freelance project documenting environmental ghost zones in the Appalachians, places where the land doesn't behave like it should. Old mines where fog never lifts. Trails where birds won't sing. The kind of stories rangers deny and locals stop talking about when you lean in too close. I'd just come back from a dry creek in Kentucky that ran red after storms when the journal landed in my mailbox. It felt intentional. The journal mentioned a place I'd never heard of: Furnace Ridge Fire Line, near the Tennessee-North Carolina border, inside the Cherokee National Forest, according to the notes. It was a backburn operation gone wrong. 7 fire warden cabins arranged in a wide ring around a lookout tower. The fire never reached them, yet all communications went dead. And when the rangers arrived, days later, the cabins were empty. No signs of struggle, no bodies. Just smoke damage and, as one entry said, mirrors where there shouldn't have been any. I drove down the next morning. The ranger station at the foot of the mountains was boarded up, but a gas station clerk remembered the place. There used to be trails, he said, chewing at a fingernail. They rerouted most of them. Said the soil went sour. Trees don't root right up there. When I asked about the fireline cabins, his eyes dropped. They didn't burn. He muttered, "That's what's wrong. Nothing ever burned." With the journal as my map and my GPS loaded with old ranger maps I'd stitched together, I hiked in. The forest felt choked and dense, like the branches had grown inward instead of up. I followed a barely there fire road, more a suggestion than a path, until the first cabin appeared through the trees low to the ground, sun-bleached, half swallowed by undergrowth. It took me 20 minutes to find the door. Inside, the air was stale but dry. A metal-framed cot, rusted at the joints, leaned against the wall. Ash coated the windowsill, even though there was no chimney. As I stepped further in, my audio recorder crackled once and died. Fresh batteries. I switched to my phone, but the mic input glitched. I could hear faint static through my earbuds, like a man whispering just out of range. I chalked it up to bad reception. I always start with the rational explanation. Cabin 2 smelled like smoke the moment I opened the door. Not wood smoke chemical. Sharp, like scorched plastic. The air inside was cold enough to fog my breath, though it was nearly 70 degrees outside. Something had burned here, but nothing was blackened. The bed was made, tucked with military precision. A mirror hung on the back of the door, round and fogged with what looked like breath. Though no one else was around, every cabin after that had a mirror, always in a different spot above the sink, nailed to a tree just outside, set on a stool facing a blank wall. At cabin 4, the mirror was clear. Too clear. I caught my reflection as I passed, then looked back. In the mirror, I was still standing there, watching myself walk away. I stared at it until my stomach twisted. When I blinked, the reflection blinked too, but late, like it had to catch up. I tried to leave, but the trail kept looping. I'd hike for 20 minutes, follow my compass, stay the course, and still end up back at cabin 4. Every time. The reflection was closer to the glass. That night, I camped between cabins, refusing to sleep inside any of them. The forest was silent, except for the wind, which didn't move. The trees just pushed the smell of old ash against my skin. I listened to my recording from earlier. The static was louder now. Beneath it, I heard my own voice, low and strained, whispering a name, Annie. I hadn't said it. In the journal, I found a torn page tucked between 2 others. It was different from the rest, older, typed. The ring must remain. 7 mirrors facing inward. If the line breaks, it breathes. If it breathes, it remembers. Below it, a sketch of the cabins arranged like the points of a compass. By the time I reached cabin 6, I felt watched. The trail ahead was slick with a film that shimmered in the sun. I knelt and touched it. It came away like soot, but smelled sweet, cloying, like burnt sugar and rot. I realized I hadn't seen birds in hours. No squirrels, no deer, only trees and smoke. And then I saw cabin 7. Or rather, I saw the smoke around it hugging the ground. Not rising, thick, dark, pulsing like it had weight. It moved slow, against the wind. I didn't step forward. I didn't breathe. Not yet. The smoke didn't move like it should have. It rolled low, hugging the soil like water seeking cracks. I watched it ripple across the ground toward cabin 7, sliding beneath the porch, crawling up the steps, but never rising. It didn't billow, didn't dissipate, just pressed close, thick as syrup. And inside the smoke, something flickered. I held my breath and stepped around it, climbing onto the porch where the boards were blackened but dry. The door hung open, not blown or kicked in, just ajar, as if waiting. Inside, the air was still, the temperature 10 degrees colder. Dust drifted in slow spirals. The cot was untouched. The walls were bare. Except for one thing. A chair sat into the far corner, facing the window where the old fire tower used to stand. And in it, slumped forward, was a body, skin like paper, sunken into the frame, one hand still clutching a metal object. I edged closer. The air shimmered around the figure, the smell of sweet smoke thick enough to make my eyes water. I squatted down and saw the badge tarnished, blackened around the edges, a forest warden's insignia, with a small, hand-carved mirror set into the center. I took it. The air changed instantly. The shimmer snapped. The sweet rot vanished. Outside, the smoke twitched and rolled back from the porch like it had been shoved. I felt something shift deep in the trees, like a breath drawn in too slow. That's when the voices started. They didn't speak. They repeated. Snatches of sound. like old radio transmissions cutting in and out, contained the line mirrors cracked smoke. I pressed my palms to my ears and stumbled out of the cabin. The mirror and the badge pulsed warm in my hand. And then I heard it. My own voice, distant but clear, Annie Calder, reporting. Annie Calder, missing. I ran. But the trail didn't lead back. It wrapped in on itself, folding around trees that shouldn't have been there. Landmarks I didn't pass before. Cabin 3 appeared ahead of me again, though I'd left it miles behind. The mirror on its door was shattered. I remembered the page from the journal, "The Ring Must Remain." 7 mirrors, facing inward. This one was broken. The line was open. I sat down on the steps, heart hammering, trying to breathe slow. I held the badge in front of me. The mirror glowed faintly now, reflecting not my face, but a flickering image. Cabin 4, its mirror intact. And inside it, a woman, me, but older, standing still, waiting. I understood then. The cabins weren't built for shelters. They were placed like stones in a circle, each one anchoring something inside it. The fire line wasn't to stop the wildfire from spreading. It was to trap it. Not fire as in flame, but something older, deeper. The smoke that didn't rise. The breath of something buried. I had to fix the ring. Cabin 4 was the key. The reflection I saw, the me that wasn't me, was there, watching, trapped. I retraced my steps, following the pull of the badge mirror. Every loop of the trail felt thinner, more fragile. The forest blurred at the edges. Cabin 4 reappeared like a wound in the trees. And this time, the mirror on the door was clean, but I wasn't in it. The reflection was empty now. Just the room behind me. I approached slowly, a heart in my throat. I raised the badge and pressed the mirror fragment to the one already there. The edges shimmered, the glass humming like it recognized its missing piece. I placed it against the surface, and it fused. No crack, no seam. The moment the mirror became whole, the wind returned. Hard, snapping trees, whipping dirt into the air. The smoke from cabin 7 shrieked an actual sound, tearing through the woods like metal grinding on metal. But it didn't surge. It sank, pulled toward the center of the circle, where the old fire tower once stood. I dropped to my knees and watched as the smoke collapsed in on itself, drawn by something beneath the earth. A vacuum. A breath finally exhaled. And then, silence. Just bird song, first one, then another, distant, real. I didn't stay. I left the cabins behind without looking back. The trail was clear now, the trees thinner, the light brighter. My phone buzzed once signal. Finally, but I didn't check it. I walked until I hit gravel, then asphalt, then the edge of a logging road where a truck slowed to a stop and a voice asked if I was okay. I lied. I said I got lost, said I was hiking old trails, didn't realize how far in I'd gone. I didn't mention the badge, or the mirrors, or the smoke. But I kept the journal. And now, sometimes, when I wake up, the mirror in my room is fogged only for a second, like someone breathed on it from the inside. My uncle died in May, and by June I was the owner of a stretch of woodland I'd never heard of. Came with one cabin, a few acres, and an envelope full of brittle papers that smelled like smoke and oil. I was told he hadn't been up there in years, but when the lawyer handed me the deed, he gave me a look like I'd signed something I shouldn't have. "You'll want to leave it be," he said, smoothing his tie. "That property's tied up in a few older arrangements." I asked if that meant zoning or liens. He didn't answer. I left Charleston early, truck bed loaded with tools and canned food. The idea was simple. Fix the place up. Maybe use it for hunting. Maybe sell it down the line. The drive into Monroe County took me past rusted mailboxes and road signs that had turned completely silver. A woman at a roadside market told me I'd passed the last gas station for 20 miles when I told her where I was headed. She muttered something I didn't catch, then added, "If your name's on the deed, leave her milk and bone. If not, don't step past her creek." I found the cabin tucked at the edge of a dried-up logging trail. About an hour passed where the road stopped being paved. The structure sagged but stood. The wood was gray with age, the shutters open like blinking eyes. As I walked up, I noticed 6 other cabins, staggered down a bend in the trail, all leaning into the trees. Some were barely more than shells. Mine looked the best kept, which wasn't saying much. But the porch had been swept recently. That I was sure of. The door creaked open to a room that smelled faintly of vinegar and cedar. Dust floated in the air, but not much. The floorboards didn't creak under my weight. Someone, maybe my uncle, had taken care of it longer than they'd admitted. On the windowsill sat a chipped white bowl with a crust of dried milk in the bottom. Next to it, laid neatly on a small square of cloth, was a bone. It looked human, but too small. Child-sized, polished. There were carvings above the door frame, almost lost in the grain of the wood. A circle, hollow in the center, flanked by 3 angled lines like branches or antlers. I traced it with one finger. The edges were sharp, fresh. The other cabins, when I walked past them later, all had the same mark. Some were worn, almost smooth. Mine looked new. That night, I sat on the porch with a tin of beans and a bottle of cheap bourbon. The air was still, almost too still. No frogs, no wind, just the occasional crack of settling wood. I told myself it was peaceful. I told myself I needed the quiet, needed the space. Divorce leaves a hollow in your chest that noise can't touch. But I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone, not watched, exactly witnessed. In the cabin's filing box, under old tax documents and property surveys, I found the lease, dated 1924, issued by something called the Hollowbone Timber Company, long since defunct. The document had 2 signatures, one in black ink, Harlan T. Royer, Sears Hale, my great-grandfather, the other in what looked like dried blood initials, only BW. A clause near the bottom was circled in red pencil: caretakers must stay 1 week per year to maintain the lease. Nightly offerings are required once sun has fully set. I figured it was a joke. Some folk story dressed up like a contract. But part of me, something deeper than sense, felt uneasy. I poured out some milk from the thermos I'd packed and set it in the same chipped bowl. Found a chicken bone from the soup can and laid it beside the cloth, just in case. The next morning, the milk was gone. Not spilled, not dried gone. The bone, too. In its place was a fresh one, longer, hollow, smelled faintly of salt. I didn't remember hearing anything in the night, but I'd slept with one eye open, flashlight gripped in my hand. Day 2. I walked the cabins again. Cabin 2's door was cracked open. Inside, someone had swept the floor recently, same as mine. A woven mat had been laid out with a dented bowl at its center. No sign of life. But the space didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. I found strands of hair at the threshold, tangled and white, as still wet. By day 3, I noticed my sigil above the door had faded slightly. The edges weren't as sharp. That night, the milk curdled before sunset. I didn't have another bone. I left a coin instead. The bowl was overturned by morning. The porch was smeared with muddy prints bare. Human, but too wide. Each toe sharp as a claw. That night, I dreamed of the creek that cut through the woods just west of the cabins. In the dream, a woman crawled from the water, her hair like riverweed. Skin stretched thin. Her face was hidden beneath a veil of twigs, but her hands were long and wrong. She held out a lease, and when I took it, it split my palm. When I woke up, my hand was bleeding. The lease was back on the table. A new signature had been added in red, and it wasn't mine. I didn't remember signing anything, not with ink, not with blood. But there it was, my name scrawled in the same red as the old initials on the original lease. The letters crooked, sharp, more carved than written. I stared at it for a long time, tried to tell myself it was a trick, a leftover stain from the dream, but my palm was still bleeding. The cut matched the angle of the signature exactly. That morning, the bowl was empty again. The bone offering had vanished, but in its place was something heavier, an old silver key, rusted at the teeth. I recognized it. My uncle used to keep it on a string around his neck, said it unlocked cabin 5. I never asked why that one was different. He never answered anyway. I took the key and walked the trail in silence. The woods were quieter than they'd been. It's like everything was holding its breath. The sigils above the other cabins were almost gone now. Their carvings faded to the point of vanishing. Mine was the only one still fresh, though I hadn't touched it. I reached cabin 5 just before noon. The door was rotted, sagging, but the key slid in smooth. The lock clicked like it had been waiting. Inside was nothing but dust and bones. Animal, mostly squirrel, rabbit. Something larger curled beneath the bed, like it had died hiding. And above the mantel was a ledger nailed to the wall. Handwritten. Names and dates. I recognized my uncle's name, with 7 dates marked over the last decade. All had check marks beside them except the most recent. Next to it, a single word, collected. Others had been crossed out entirely. One name I didn't recognize had a note beside it in tiny print, failed offering. Cabin 2, taken on 3rd night. I felt the floor tilt under me. My stomach turned. This wasn't a tradition or superstition. It was bookkeeping. The Bone Widow, whoever, whatever she was, didn't break rules. She enforced them. That night, I brought fresh milk. I snapped a clean bone from a rotisserie chicken I'd packed, scrubbed it under the pump, and laid it out with a clean cloth. The bowl didn't move. The porch stayed quiet. I sat inside with the lantern low, waiting. Around midnight, I heard movement from the woods. Not footsteps, dragging, like wet fabric pulled over roots. I didn't move. The window on the left fogged slightly, though the air outside was dry. A shape leaned close, just enough to distort the glass a face hidden by long strands of what looked like hair or moss. I didn't look directly. I kept my eyes on the floor, like the stories say you should. She left when the wind picked up, just vanished. No footsteps retreating, no brush rustling, just silence after tension, like a pulled wire finally snapped. The next morning, the milk and bone were gone. The bowl had been cleaned and left upside down. Day 5. I started seeing her farther out, standing in the creek, watching, on the edge of the tree line, arms wrapped in what looked like gauze and feathers. Sometimes I'd blink and she'd be gone. Sometimes I'd blink and she'd be closer. I checked the lease again. There was a clause I hadn't noticed in the absence of additional caretakers. Obligation multiplies. A cabin untended is a mouth unbound. I reread it 3 times, and the meaning landed like a stone in my gut. 7 cabins, 7 caretakers. I was alone now. That night, I made 7 offerings. Milk and bone, 1 at each door. It took hours. I left the last bowl at cabin 6 as the sky turned purple and the whippoorwills stopped calling. When I returned to my cabin, the porch had been swept clean. On the threshold sat the silver key, now split down the center like it had been struck by lightning. Day 6, I heard hammering, rhythmic, distant, measured like someone was building something deeper in the woods. I followed the sound to a clearing I hadn't seen before. There were no paths to it, just space where the trees had bent away. In the center stood a frame, a cabin I didn't remember, half finished, wood still green. The hammering stopped as I approached. No one was there. But on the lintel, the sigil was already carved, and below it, "See Hail" in red. That night I slept inside my truck. Doors locked. I left no offerings. The dreams came anyway. She stood at the foot of my cot, head bent to one side, veil dripping water onto the floor. In one hand, she held a lease. In the other, a hammer made of bone. This morning, there are 8 cabins, and I know what comes next. I don't remember booking this cabin. I remember looking at listings, forested spots deep in the Appalachians, miles from anywhere with a signal, but not this one. No price, no host photo, just coordinates, a 2-sentence description, and a single review. You'll find it when you're ready. My calendar showed a reservation. The key was already in my jacket pocket. Maybe I'd forgotten. Maybe I was more burned out than I realized. The first morning was foggy, not unusual for mid-September, especially at this elevation. The cabin was small, tucked between pines, with a view of the holler below. Weathered siding, rusted chimney pipe. No power, exactly what I'd wanted. Inside was simple cot, table, stove, a single window looking east. No mirror, no clock. I set up my gear before sunrise and hiked a mile out to photograph the mist lifting off the trees. It felt right. The second morning, I stepped outside and sunk to my ankles in snow. No warning. No storm the night before. Just silence, and a thick white crust covering everything. The pines were gone, replaced by bare oak and maple limbs frosted over like glasswork. I stood in the doorway in my thermals and socks, staring out at a completely different forest. Same cabin, same window, but nothing else matched. I told myself I must have hiked back to the wrong cabin. I checked the frame, my initials, still carved into the side where I'd tested my knife on day one. My mug was inside, coffee still warm. I hadn't left. That day, I stayed close. Shot film of the ice clinging to branches. Watched a fox pick its way across the ridge, then vanish into a snowbank. I tried to mark a trail, but every tree looked the same. When I circled back, the cabin was there, exactly where it shouldn't have been. The third morning, the snow was gone. The trees were green again, but not the same ones. New growth, saplings and underbrush I hadn't seen before. The air smelled wrong, thick and floral, like early spring. Birds chirped but never landed. My breath didn't fog, and when I stood still long enough, I could hear the soft tick of the stove cooling behind me. That's when I started keeping notes. I logged the temperature, tree species, light angles. I drew the shape of the tree line from the porch. Each day, it changed. Not wildly, but enough that I knew I wasn't imagining it. The cabin never moved, but the world around it did. Inside, nothing shifted. The cot stayed firm, the boards dry, no mildew, no drafts. My gear was untouched each morning. But my boots were always damp, like I'd walked through something in the night. My socks, crusted with mud or pine needles I didn't remember tracking. On the fifth morning, I opened the door and found another man standing just beyond the clearing. Same build, same clothes. He didn't move. I blinked. He was gone. I didn't chase him. I went back inside and locked the door, though I wasn't sure it would help. That night, I slept with the knife under my pillow. I thought about leaving. Tried to. But the forest never led anywhere. Hike long enough, and I ended up back at the cabin no matter which direction I chose. The sun rose in the wrong place once, another time. It didn't set at all. The light just paused, stretched thin like a dying bulb until night snapped into place like a switch being thrown. On the seventh morning, I found a journal in the drawer. I swear it hadn't been there before. The first page was yellowed and torn. In handwriting that wasn't mine. It read, "This cabin has no foundation. It follows those who need it, but it won't let them go unless someone else takes their place." Below it, a date, October 17th, 1992. No name, just a drawing of the cabin, surrounded by 7 different forests. I flipped through the rest sketches, lists of trees, notes about sounds at night. One page was dog-eared. In red ink, "Do not look at yourself through the window after dark. It's not you." That night, I left the curtains open, just to see. What looked back from the glass had my face, but it didn't blink. I closed the curtain, not fast, slowly, like it wouldn't notice. My breath caught in my chest, but I didn't look again. I didn't want to see what it did when I wasn't watching. That night, I didn't sleep. Not really. Every time my eyes closed, I felt a shift, like the cabin was adjusting around me, just slightly, just enough to keep me from forgetting where I was. The next morning, the window was gone. Same wall, same cabin. But the glass, the frame, the curtain, all of it vanished, as if it had never been there. I checked the outside wall. Smooth wood, no seams, no shadow, just the faint memory of where it should have been. I searched for the reflection too, but there was nothing to reflect. Just trees I didn't recognize and a sky that looked too pale to be real. That day, I didn't take any photos. I sat on the porch and listened. The wind didn't move the trees. The shadows didn't match the light. Around noon, a sound started from deep in the woods, steady, rhythmic, like something tapping on bark. Not a bird, not any animal I knew. It kept time, like a metronome, and stopped only when I stood up. When I sat back down, it started again. In the journal, I found another page marked in red. The cabin adapts. The longer you stay, the more it learns your shape. You won't know what it's keeping until it's taken enough. Below that, in different handwriting, someone had added, "I don't remember my name. Don't let it get that far." I packed that night, took only what I could carry, marked a trail with a string and carved arrows into trees. I told myself I'd keep walking no matter what, that I'd never turn around. The moment I left the porch, I felt the shift air pressure dropping, sound muffled. The forest ahead bent in a way that didn't look natural. Branches didn't grow like that. I walked for 3 hours, never saw a single landmark repeat. But the trail behind me kept vanishing. I turned once, just once, and there it was. The cabin, in front of me again. Porch light flickering, even though I'd never turned it on. The door was open. Inside, the journal lay on the cot, open to a blank page, a pen beside it. My handwriting had filled half the sheet. This cabin has no foundation. I didn't remember writing it. I didn't sit down. I didn't pick up the pen. But the ink was still wet. I backed away slowly and shut the door, then nailed it closed with the claw hammer I kept in my pack. That night, I heard footsteps above me. The cabin didn't have a second floor. In the morning, it was raining, but the sound was wrong. Too fast, too hollow. I opened the door and saw bones scattered across the clearing small, clean, laid in patterns I didn't understand. None of them were broken. Some had names scratched into them. Mine wasn't there. Not yet. The forest outside was autumn now. The kind of autumn you see in paintings, too vivid, too perfect. Leaves that didn't fall, trees that didn't sway, no animals, no birds, just silence. And the hum of the cabin's walls, like they were waiting for something. I flipped through the journal again. A final note had appeared on the inside cover. You can't leave alone, but you can leave if someone finds the door. I don't know how long I've been here. The dates in the journal loop. My photos repeat. Same trees, same light. My voice recorder only plays back silence now. I tried carving days into the floor, but the boards heal overnight. I've stopped eating regularly. Time doesn't move the way it should. My watch ticks, but never changes. The cabin remembers me. It hums when I speak. The door creaks before I touch it. The window, when it appears, shows me things I shouldn't see. Sometimes. Other cabins. Sometimes. Other versions of me. Smiling when I'm not. So now I wait. I've left the door unlocked. I've scribbled a review into the back of the journal. Just one sentence. You'll find it when you're ready. Because someone else will come. And when they do, maybe I can leave. The rain started just after noon, steady and cold, with clouds piling like ash over the western ridgeline. I'd planned a 2-day hike through the lesser-used section of the Raven Step Trail, mostly just to clear my head. I hadn't seen another person since leaving the gravel lot that morning. It was supposed to be one of those quiet, personal getaways people always recommend after a breakup. I told myself I needed solitude. But the truth was, I wanted to vanish somewhere no one would ask how I was holding up. By the time I rounded the bend above the old quarry, my jacket was soaked through and my legs ached from the grade. That's when I saw the cabin. Half hidden behind a stand of pine, and barely more than a shack. It leaned like it hadn't seen a tenant in years. The boards were gray and soft-looking, but the tin roof was intact. There was no trail leading to it, just a faint path cut through knee-high grass and rain-dark stones. Something about it felt out of place. Not ominous, not yet. Just too convenient. Like a bench on a hiking trail where there shouldn't be one. I approached from the side and knocked once, then twice. No answer. The door was latched but not locked. Inside was dusty but dry. One cot, collapsed in the corner. A wooden crate. And, strangest of all, a thick padlock affixed to a square hatch in the middle of the floor, a cellar door reinforced with iron bands. A crowbar lay beside it like an afterthought. There were chalk marks on the wall near the hatch. Old but visible. Don't open. Don't listen. I waited, unsure what I was hoping for. Maybe some animal sound below. A rustle of movement. Anything to suggest what was under there. But it was dead silent. I took off my wet jacket, propped the door with a rock, and decided to wait out the worst of the storm. My phone had no signal, of course, but I kept checking it out of habit. Time passed slowly. I counted heartbeats. I tried not to look at the hatch. It was near dusk when I first heard it, a single knock from below. Not loud, but solid. I sat up fast, listening. Another knock. Then a pause. Then a voice, hoarse, low. Please, help me. My whole body stiffened. It sounded too real, too close. I wanted to believe it was the wind, or maybe some animal call. But that voice was human. No question. I crept closer to the hatch. The padlock hadn't moved. The voice came again. I'm down here, please. It's been days. Every instinct in me split in two. One half screamed, run. The other whispered, what if it's true I asked who they were? The voice didn't give a name, just kept begging. Said they were trapped. Said they couldn't breathe. I stared at the padlock. It was old, maybe decades. I picked up the crowbar, felt its weight. Then I saw the small wooden box on the crate I hadn't noticed before. It had once been painted blue, now chipped down to raw wood. Inside a single brass key and a folded note. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was faint but legible. One dies, one lives. Choose right. The room felt colder then. I looked back at the hatch. Whoever was down there had gone quiet, not even breathing. I didn't know what that meant. Maybe they passed out. Maybe they were waiting. I sat back against the far wall, key in hand, trying to quiet my thoughts. I didn't sleep, just watched the hatch through the dark. Near midnight, the voice returned, softer this time. Please, it said. You're the first one who stayed. I didn't answer. Not yet. By dawn, the rain had thinned to a cold drizzle, and my head was pounding from lack of sleep. I stepped outside for a moment just to breathe something that wasn't cabin air. Mist hung in the trees, low and unmoving, like the world was holding its breath. I stared down the trail I'd come from, half tempted to start walking and never look back. But something held me there, not curiosity, not even guilt, just that nagging certainty that whatever was in the hatch hadn't finished with me. When I re-entered the cabin, the silence felt heavier. I checked the hatch again. The padlock was still there. The key still warm from my grip. No new sound. No movement. It should have been easy, just walk away. But then I saw the second note. It hadn't been there last night. Folded on top of the wooden box. Same handwriting. This one read, "If you open it, you must stay. If you leave it, someone else will come." I didn't have time to process it. A branch snapped outside. A heavy footstep in the wet grass. I grabbed the crowbar instinctively and stood still, heart hammering in my chest. Another step, closer. Then a voice, rough, low, almost casual. "You stayed the night." I turned to see a man in a tattered jacket and thick beard, dripping wet, mid-40s maybe, mud on his boots. His left hand was bandaged, but dark, with something beneath. He introduced himself as Tommy, said he used to work the old mines near here, back before the whole ridge was shut down. I asked if he knew about the cabin. He nodded once. "That hatch shouldn't be opened," he said. "You hear it." Right, I didn't reply. I didn't need to. He stepped inside like it was his place, looked around with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen it too many times. Tommy explained the story like it was local truth, said that decades ago, when the mining camp was still active. One of the men not right in the head had killed someone. Not in anger, not in a fight. Just did it. Quietly. Then waited in camp like nothing had happened. They didn't call the law. They locked him in the cellar of this cabin and left him to die. But he didn't, Tommy muttered. Or at least, not the way we think. The body was never found. Only the voice remained. I didn't ask how he knew. I could tell he believed every word. He said others had come across the cabin since then. Most left. Some stayed too long. None opened it. That voice, it learns you. Takes your tone, your pauses, eventually. It sounds just like you. My stomach dropped at that. I hadn't told him about the voice. But he kept talking, eyes fixed on the padlock like it might twitch. Then he said something that froze me solid. "You didn't hear it laugh, did you?" I shook my head. He nodded grimly. "Good. That's when it's almost out." He told me we needed to leave before nightfall. That whatever was in there was waiting not just for help, but for release. It'll promise anything. Sound like anyone. Cry, beg. But once it's out, it doesn't go back. We packed quickly. I should have felt relief. A rational decision. Walk away, leave it locked. Let the forest reclaim it. But as I reached for my jacket, the voice came again, louder now. Clearer, Claire. Just one word, my name. Soft, perfectly mimicked. Tommy looked at me, his face pale. "It's too soon," he whispered. "It's learning faster." We left without speaking. For the first half-mile, I felt eyes on me. Not Tommy's, not animal. Just close, watching. The trees shifted too quietly. When we reached the old quarry, I turned back for one last look. The cabin was already half lost in mist. No sound followed. I got back to my car, drove straight home, and tried not to think about it. Days passed. Then a week. I slept with lights on, avoided mirrors, ignored calls from unknown numbers. I thought I'd left it behind. Then, yesterday, I pulled my jacket from the closet to wash it, in the left pocket. Something heavy clinked against my palm. It was the padlock key, and I swear, just before I dropped it, I heard a voice behind me say, perfectly timed with my breath, "Still time to open it." The fog rolled in fast, thicker than I'd expected for this time of year, hugging the trees like old breath. I'd strayed off the main ridge trail near mile 13, thinking I could cut 20 minutes by following the runoff line down to the river basin. A shortcut, I told myself. My phone had no signal, of course, and my printed map was mostly pulp now, crumpled from the rain that started an hour ago. I didn't panic. Not yet. But as the sun disappeared behind the ridge and the chill crept in, I knew I wouldn't make it back to camp by nightfall. It was then I spotted the stone edge just past a bent laurel tree and a tangle of wire vine. A low wall, maybe a foundation at first, barely taller than my waist. As I moved closer, shapes took form, a frame, a collapsed porch, a blackened chimney. It wasn't on any map I had. There shouldn't have been a structure out here too far from the old roads, too deep in. But there it was, real, solid, and somehow familiar. I ducked under the broken frame and stepped inside. The roof sagged in the middle but held. The floor was dry, dusty, littered with pine needles. One cot, folded against the wall, a rusted lantern. And one other thing, a door, smaller than the front, set low and crooked into the far wall like it had been added after the rest of the place was built. A side room, barely larger than a pantry. Its door was shut. No lock, no handle, just an old iron hook. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I sat by the fireplace, dried my socks on a rock, and pulled out the only food I hadn't crushed, one energy bar. Broken in 3 pieces. I was too tired to be creeped out. The wind outside picked up and the fog crept in through the cracks in the stone. I told myself I'd rest here, just until the fog lifted in the morning. One night. But that smaller room gnawed at my attention. Not with noise, not with any threat. Just the shape of it, the way it didn't fit with the rest of the cabin. I finally got up and opened the door. The space was windowless and cold. A single chair in the center, legs uneven. One candle, long extinguished, melted to a metal plate. And on the wall, opposite the door, a mirror. Nailed in place. Oval, beveled. Maybe antique. It was covered in dust. But the frame looked recently touched, smudged, like someone had wiped it with their sleeve. As I stepped in, something twisted in my stomach. Deja vu, hard and deep. I'd never been here. I knew that. But I'd seen this room, not just in dreams and memory. Vague, unreliable flashes, a dark room, a mirror, and something wrong in the reflection. I'd chalked it up to childhood fever dreams. But now, standing here, the air thick with stillness, I remembered it too clearly. Then I saw it tucked under the chair leg. A small photo, faded, water-warped. It showed a man and a child standing in front of the same cabin. The man, my father, in his 30s. The child, me, maybe 6 years old. Wearing a red jacket I only remembered because my mom had sewn the pocket herself. I had no memory of the photo being taken. I turned to leave, but before I could step back into the main room, I noticed something odd in the mirror. My reflection was off. Not reversed, it was me. Sure, but younger. Not 6, more like 14. Hair too short. a shirt I hadn't owned in years. I moved my hand. The reflection didn't follow exactly. There was a delay barely half a second, like it had to think. I stepped closer, heartbeat in my throat. The moment my hand touched the glass, the reflection leaned forward, ahead of me, and mouthed something I didn't say. That's when I heard the floorboards creak behind me, the unmistakable sound of someone walking across the main room. But when I spun around, the cabin was empty, and the mirror was back to normal. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I closed my eyes for a few hours, lying stiff on the cot with my pack as a pillow. But every creak, every groan of the wind sent my pulse racing. I left the door to the mirror room closed, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. The photo, the delayed reflection, the sound of someone walking behind me. I kept trying to piece it together. When had I been here? Had I ever? Why would my father bring me to a place like this and never speak of it again? By morning, the fog hadn't lifted. It was even thicker, pressing right up against the cabin like a living thing. No birdsong, no branches snapping, just silence. I stepped outside with my gear, thinking I'd push through the trail and make it back to the ranger post. But as I stood on the threshold, something tugged at me, not physically deeper than that. I turned around. The mirror room door was open. I know I hadn't left it that way. I stared at it from across the cabin, heart thudding in my chest, and told myself it was just loose wood and air pressure. But when I stepped closer, I saw my reflection again, except this time it wasn't alone. My younger self stood there as before, but just behind him, in the dim silver of the glass. A second figure hovered tall, thin, featureless except for a dark patch where its eyes should be. I didn't remember it being there before, and I didn't remember ever seeing anything like it. Then the voice came soft, too familiar. Adam. Not a whisper, not a growl, just my father's voice, steady and warm, coming from the reflection. It's time to remember. My knees almost buckled. I stepped back. The figure behind the boy hadn't moved, but the reflection of me, the one in the mirror, stayed still as I backed away. It was watching me now, not mimicking, observing. I stumbled out of the room, grabbed my pack, and ran. Fog or no fog, I needed distance. I didn't look back until I hit the stream bed. But the trail had changed, bent, turned back on itself. I circled twice and found myself back at the cabin within 20 minutes from the opposite side. That's when I understood. I wasn't just stuck in the forest. I was stuck in a memory loop, or a recreation of one. I returned inside, breathless, shaking, and this time, I sat in the mirror room and stared at myself. Waited. After a few minutes, the reflection blinked out of sync again. Then it spoke. You forgot what he did. It said what he asked you to forget. And then it played, not out loud, just in my head, vivid like a film. Me, younger, maybe 10 or 11, hiding behind this very cabin, watching as my father dragged something someone wrapped in a tarp. A face flashed, a woman's face, bruised, still. He saw me watching. He came to me, kneeling in the pine needles, and said, "This didn't happen." Understand, I had nodded. He had smiled. That's my boy. When the memory ended, I was on the floor, gasping, cold with sweat. I didn't know if it was real, if it had happened that way. But I could smell pine sap and blood, I could feel the shape of that forgotten afternoon folding itself back into my bones. The mirror darkened, then black, like the surface of a lake. My reflection gone. In its place, my father's face, clear and sharp, like it had been yesterday. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. "You can leave," he said, "if you carry it." I didn't understand until I saw the object on the chair, a photo album I hadn't brought. I opened it. Every page was blank except one. The cabin. My father. Me. The date scribbled underneath June 1996. The year he went missing for 3 days and never explained why. I left the cabin by noon. The fog parted just enough to let me find the ridge trail again. I didn't look back. When I got home, I called my mom and asked if we'd ever gone hiking near Raven Step when I was a kid. She paused, then said softly, "No. Your dad took you once. Just the two of you. You came back shaking, wouldn't speak for 2 days. We never went again." I found the photo album in my pack last night. It still has only one picture. But now, in the background, there's a mirror. And I'm not the only one in it.